Hello, I'm Nitzan Ben Shaul from Tel Aviv University, and the title of my paper is Optional Thinking and Loop Disentanglement Strategies in Films and Video Games. So I'll start with a brief introduction. Optional thinking is the cognitive ability to generate and compare alternative hypotheses to explain events, whereas not deploying optional thinking in real life may lead to premature acceptance of inadequate hypotheses and can result in dire consequences. The opposite to optional thinking is closed-mindedness, whereby holding a certain proposition true impedes the consideration of alternatives. The direct consequences of closed-mindedness can be evidenced, for example, in the Israeli army's inadequate hypothesis that Hamas has been deterred by Israeli previous retaliation to its shelling strategy. It seems that the idea of Hamas deterrence, upon which the Israeli army was closed-minded about, may have led to the horrific massacre of October 7, 2024. Now let me briefly present my argument. In this presentation, I deal with a widespread phenomenon whereby in some films and video games, the viewer or gamer find themselves entrapped in a loop structure from which their best strategy to escape the loop may reside in their use of optional thinking. I will instantiate this strategy in the film Run Lola Run and explain why OT is the best strategy for video gamers to escape the loop within which they are often trapped. My major evidence-backed claim is that loop escapes are beneficial because this improves the viewer's or gamer's cognitive skill of optional thinking. Now, these are two major references underlying this lecture. In particular, I would recommend my book Cinema of Choice, Optional Thinking in Narrative Movies. Anyway, let me turn now briefly to the methodology guiding this lecture. In my analysis of loop structures, films, and video games, I rely on Lev Manovich's concept of data-based narration, whereby different narrative trajectories or algorithms can run over the same database. In fact, optional thinking inheres in the idea that various narrative trajectories can run over the same database. For each such trajectory implies an optional crossing and resolution of the database, of the same database. This optional crossing narrative process applies in particular to genre films, such as westerns, where each specimen usually crosses elements of the genre's shared database. You know, duels, horses, etc., components of these genres, well-known components of these genres' database. This optional crossing is particularly evident in non-genre films that instantiate such optional crossing by showing several consecutive crossings of the same database, as is clearly evident in Run Lola Run or in Lola's three consecutive runs across Berlin, and I hope you've seen the film. If not, I highly recommend it. Now, in respect of evidence for the conclusions of this paper, so the concluding claim that the beneficial optional thinking cognitive skill can be improved is based on evidence gathered in my last 2 research years funded by the Israel Science Foundation within a research project titled Optional Thinking Encouragement in Youngsters to Change Negative Stereotypes by Branching Plot Film Workshops. And in the discussion, we can unpack this title of the research. But this paper is backed, as mentioned, by the Israel Science Foundation for this particular project. And the conclusion or the evidence supporting the claims here stems from this research. Now let's go to the body of the lecture. So let me start by talking about narrative complexity, moments of classic narrative subversion. Jean-Luc Godard said, every film needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. This implied narrative complexity, achieved through play upon the classical popular film narrative scheme of exposition, complication, and resolution, characterized many contemporary films, such as Tarantino's shuffling of this scheme in Pulp Fiction, the complex reverse backward moving narrative from end to beginning in Nolan's Memento, or the irresolvable loop in Nolan's more recent film Inception, with a spinning top at the end. Now, this contemporary trend of narrative complexity the contemporary trend of narrative complexity related to the digital revolution points to a third film historical moment of complexifying the classic narrative mode. It was preceded by the 1920s Russian revolutionary filmmakers, e.g. Djiga Vertov's Men with a Movie Camera, and by the 1960s narrative complexity, particularly that of French New Wave film directors like Alain René's last year at Marianne Band, not to mention Godard. It can be said that the advent of digital interaction presents a fourth subversion of classic narrative, encapsulated, as mentioned, in Lev Manovich's concept of database narration. This database narrative complexity permeates interactive narration, particularly in contemporary video games, where each gamer intervention bifurcates the story into different developments, often obstructing thereby the narrative flow and the game's attention to the aesthetic layer of the game. Now, as defined above, excuse the repetition, optional thinking is the cognitive ability to generate and compare alternative hypotheses to explain event. And as stated, not deploying optional thinking in real life may lead to premature acceptance of inadequate hypotheses and can result, as stated, in dire consequences. Just to recap, as also mentioned above, the inability to consider optional or alternative reasons, solutions, consequences, and perspectives to life problems is largely due to closed-mindedness on certain ideas. It can be said that ideas upon which individuals are closed-minded about are such because individuals believe these ideas to be true. Therefore, they cannot consider alternatives. Now, I would like to offer you an optional thinking exercise and optional thinking in respect of optional thinking encouragement. So, the following question or statement and question I pose to you is this. The king died, and then the queen died. And I ask you, why did she die? Why? Can anybody offer an answer to this question? Let me run ahead. She could have died because out of heartbreak that the king died, or because, peasants revolted and killed her, because she was a bad queen, and so on and so forth. But you can come with more and more answers. Now, in fact, this latter statement, the king died and then the queen died, is a story because it implies causality, which is the sine qua non of storytelling. In fact, each of the answers to the question presents a viable option because it answers the question with a relevant, non-incidental reply. I suggest that this brief exercise may encourage in itself the beneficial cognitive skill of optional thinking. Try play it, and you'll understand what I mean. Now, I would like to talk of optional thinking and closed-mindedness in films and video games. In general, popular films and video games try to tell one story with one major character reaching a clear goal while overcoming obstacles in mounting suspense until resolution. Now let's a brief word about suspense and closed-mindedness. Suspense concerns uncertainty regarding a problem that you care about. Usually I like protagonist under duress, for example, so that the viewer is under intense expectation for resolution and relief, thereby deprived by the often fast audiovisual flow from considering alternatives to the action or what-if thoughts. This often leads the viewer to consider the film as a necessary trajectory that must be what it is, as well as to his/her being closed-minded, particularly upon the dominant idea or ideology underlying the moment of suspense relief upon narrative resolution. Therefore, I suggest we consider narratives as based on probability and viability rather than on necessity. Now, briefly on optional thinking in films and video games. Now, notwithstanding the above, not all movies close-mind the viewer. Some, like Run Lola Run, Sliding Doors, or Rashomon, get the viewer thinking about optional or alternative narrative developments while comparing different perspectives, rather than just the one of one leading character, as is usual in non-complex narrative popular films. In that sense, such films encourage optional thinking rather than closed-mindedness. Hence, Sliding Doors offers two versions of the same story, compelling the viewer to compare these and think of options. Run Lola Run offers three versions, 3 runs, and Rashomon offers 4 versions and 4 characters, differing perspectives on the same events. This narrative complexity can further be found in interactive narration, as in contemporary video games, where each gamer intervention bifurcates the story into different developments, as in, if you're familiar with this concept, open world games, where the gamer navigates his or her avatar, making different choices that lead to optional developments. Now, let's talk now about loop escape in films and interactive video games. As argued, some films and a common practice in video games concerns the viewer or gamer's entrapment in a loop structure, from which his best strategy to untangle the loop may reside in his use of optional thinking. Because each time he encounters a difficult obstacle and is sent back, he has to design or devise an optional strategy. I'll talk about this in a little while. But first, let me talk about optional thinking loop disentanglement in Run Lola Run. Let me try to briefly describe in 3 steps the film's loop and Lola's disentanglement from it by optional thinking. First, I'll talk about the setup in this film. In this film, Lola's boyfriend, Manny, calls to inform her that he has to repay a gangster 100,000 German marks by noon, or he will be killed. This sets a scene where, very interesting, I can show you right now, while the camera circles around Lola, she quickly considers the options she had. For example, appeal to her banker father, asking for financial help. From this circular loop shot, she breaks out running towards the bank, where her disloyal father will refuse her requests. She kidnaps him and resumes her run, but is shot dead by a police officer safeguarding the presumed robbed bank. This is followed by a scene in Limbo, where dead Lola discusses her love for Manny with him. Then, the film restarts with Lola running again towards Manny, but this time around, Manny is shot dead. A second Limbo scene ensues, followed by a restart and a third run of Lola towards Manny. However, this third time around, Lola reaches in desperation a casino where she puts a bet, and as the roulette is turning, Lola screams, deafening all around her, a scene concluding with the roulette ball magically stopping at the number she bet on. In the final scene, Lola and Manny walk away with double the debt money, concluding in an incidental freeze frame. Now, a word about the loops in the film. In principle, Lola could run beyond the film's 3 optional runs repeatedly. This creates a looping structure within which Lola is trapped. This loop structure is replicated in various scenes and images, such as the looped circular camera scene mentioned, along with various images of loop structures along the film. As I have shown in my research, by the way, the film optional runs encourage optional thinking in viewers. For example, one of my research exercises was to write a 4th run to Lola. However, what is interesting is that in Lola, the loop breaks are presented within an intense suspense situations. Let me briefly, the loop escapes. Now, the 3 optional runs help Lola break out of her looped and very suspenseful entanglements, whereas her final scream releases from the accumulating loop structures. Moreover, while suspense is usually a close-minding strategy, in Lola Run, a sense of hope, chance, choice, and indetermination is imparted to the viewer through the happy ending and the film's incidental final freeze frame. Now briefly, optional thinking loop disentanglement in video games. Video games are often looped in the recurrent attempt to overcome a difficult game obstacle and are usually sent to retry by the game over slide. These recurring attempts by video gamers to break free of the loop encourages optional thinking in gamers due to the need to develop optional strategies at each recurring attempt to overcome a difficult obstacle. This optional thinking process is beneficial and aids the exit of the loop, as evidenced in the satisfying loop break achieved upon successful decoding of a video game's obstacles' previous impermeability. Thank you. Ciao.